The four friends stood in the greenhouse, the sweet scent of earth and petals swirling around them as Miranel wove the final threads of illusion. They formed a circle, hands clasped, and Lorali looked at each of them in turn. "Whatever happens next," Raiskin whispered, "we will find each other again. No spell, no curse, no wall will keep us apart." Miranel nodded, her voice trembling as she added her promise. Tavern squeezed their hands tightly. Lorali, her disguise flickering in the lamplight, pressed a token into Raiskin's palm, a silver ring, cool and solid. "This is my vow," she mouthed. "I will find you, no matter what they do to me." They spoke the oath together, words ancient and binding, magic humming in the air to return to one another, to trust their hearts, to resist despair even if the world conspired to scatter them. Outside, footsteps echoed on cobblestones, the watchers closing in. The group's circle broke, and Lorali slipped away into the shadows, her form melting into the illusion as she vanished into the night. Raiskin's heart twisted with both hope and dread. As the greenhouse emptied, he knew the magic of friendship and love would be tested soon. But their promise was a beacon, one that even Malachor or the will of angry fathers would find hard to extinguish. As Lorali faded into the night, Raiskin lingered in the greenhouse, heart heavy with longing and fear. He knelt before the tokens of their oath, the silver ring, Miranel's charm, Tavern's wand, and whispered the anchor of memory's final phrase. Reaching deep into the ritual's magic, he sent a pulse of will through the web they'd woven, searching for some sign that their bond still endured. A stranger warmth blossomed in his chest, followed by a gentle tingle in his palm where Lorali's ring rested. His mind brushed against the presence of his friends. Miranel's spark of hope, Tavern's steady resolve, and faint but unmistakable Loralia's love, distant yet unbroken. The magic shimmered around him, a promise that, for now, they were still connected, no matter how far they were scattered. Yet even as comfort filled him, Raiskin sensed the shadow of Malachor circling, probing for weakness. The spirit could not breach the bond tonight, but its hunger was undiminished. The true test would come when one of them faltered, when hope was at its thinnest. He rose, gathered the tokens, and whispered a final vow to the night. "We will find each other again." The ritual's light faded, but the promise lingered, defying the darkness with every heartbeat. Back in the quiet of his room, Raiskin forced his mind from longing and loss to discipline and study. He poured himself into advanced spellcraft, determined to graduate with honors and keep his friends safe. The Academy's teachers took notice. Raiskin's dueling spells crackled with precision. His essays drew praise for their insight, and he seemed almost tireless, always the last to leave the library or the training grounds. Yet beneath the surface, changes crept in. Raiskin's patience wore thin with classmates who joked or wasted time, and his temper flared at the smallest slight. Where he once found joy in simple cantrips, now he sought ever more complex and dangerous rituals, pushing himself to the edge. His friends worried but said nothing, hoping it was only the stress of exams and the pain of separation from Lorali. One night as Raiskin practiced a difficult spell, the shadows in his room seemed to swell and deepen. The incantation came easily, too easily, and a voice, a cold and familiar, whispered in the back of his mind, "You are not alone." You are never alone. Raiskin shuddered, but did not break his concentration. He would not surrender. He would finish his studies, honor the oath, and defy the darkness, even as it threaded itself ever more tightly around his soul. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, Raiskin threw himself into forbidden texts and ever riskier spells. He memorized complex sigils by candlelight, practiced incantations that left his hands numb and his mind buzzing, and began to excel in magical competitions with a ruthless edge. Even his professors, while impressed, whispered of his intensity and the shadows that seemed to cling to him. His friends noticed the change. Tavern tried to draw him out with jokes and sparring matches, while Miranel watched him with growing concern, her illusions ever more gentle, as if trying to soothe the darkness she sensed. But Raiskin brushed off their worries, convinced that power alone would keep Malachar at bay, and, perhaps, win back the future he'd lost with Lorelei. It was during a late-night study session that Raiskin discovered a spell of shadow manipulation buried in an old grimoire. The words called to him, a promising strength and clarity, and he could not resist. As he spoke them, the room seemed to grow both colder and brighter, his own shadow twisting into something living, something that watched him with hungry eyes. He shuddered, but could not stop. He was on the cusp of mastery, but each step forward left a piece of himself behind, and somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, soon you will be strong enough to remake the world, or destroy it. Raiskin began a second, secret journal. An unmarked battered notebook hidden beneath a loose floorboard. In it, he recorded every experiment with shadow magic. Every time Malachar's voice twisted his thoughts, every subtle shift in his emotions. The act was both confession and safeguard. If he lost his way, this record might help him, or his friends, find him again. He tracked the spells that came most easily, the moments when his anger flared without cause, the dreams where shadows beckoned with promises of strength and vengeance. Some entries were brief, just a line, felt nothing when Tavern joked, should have laughed. Others were desperate. Malachar wanted me to hurt someone today. I almost did. The more Raiskin wrote, the more he realized how much of himself was at war. Some days, the rituals and the company of friends kept him anchored. Other nights, the journal's ink seemed to bleed into the darkness, and he wondered if the act of documenting his descent was just another way to surrender. But he wrote anyway. He wrote for Lorelei, for Miranel and Tavern, and for the boy he'd once been. And when the shadows grew thickest, he whispered their names and dared the darkness to erase them. Before sleep that night, Raiskin arranged his anchors. Lorelei's ring, Miranel's illusionist charm, Tavern's wand. Within a fresh chalk circle, he whispered the anchor of memory's invocation, letting each memory rise and settle as he focused on friendship, laughter, and love. The ritual's warmth spread through his chest, pushing back the cold whisper of Malachar, and for a few precious moments his thoughts were his own. As he drifted towards sleep, the magic held Malachar at bay, but his dreams were troubled all the same. He saw himself at the Academy's graduation, standing apart from the crowd, shadows coiling at his feet, Lorale called to him from beyond a wall of glass, and Miranel and Tavern stood by his side, their faces flickering with concern. Raiskin reached for them, but the shadows pulled at his limbs, promising power and release. He woke with a gasp, the memory of the ritual still glowing faintly in his mind. The anchor had given him a night's peace, but the darkness was patient. Raiskin resolved to keep performing the ritual, alone and with his friends, until graduation and beyond, even as the line between self-defense and obsession grew ever thinner. If Malachar was to be defeated, Raiskin would need every scrap of hope, every bond, and every spell he could muster. But as he prepared for the day, he wondered, was the ritual keeping him safe, or just delaying the inevitable? Raiskin found Professor Nevron in his office, surrounded by star maps and ancient tomes. He hesitated only a moment before closing the door and speaking in a low, urgent voice. "Professor, I need your help. I've been using every ritual I know. Anchor of memory, protective wards. But Malachar's voice is growing stronger. I'm afraid of what I'm becoming. How do I break a spirit's hold, truly break it, before I lose myself?" Nevron's eyes narrowed with concern, but he did not look surprised. "You are wise to seek help before it is too late," he said, motioning Raiskin to sit. "Breaking such a bond is dangerous work. It requires not only magic and friends, but a willingness to face the darkest parts of yourself. Most who fall to spirits do so because they deny their own weakness, or because they fight alone." He unlocked a drawer, retrieving a slim volume bound in shimmering black scales. "Read this," he said. "It details the rite of severance. A ritual so taxing it can only be attempted once. It will strip a spirit's influence, but it will also lay bare your soul's deepest flaws. You must not attempt it alone. When you are ready, bring your friends. And Raiskin, promise me you will come to me first." Raiskin nodded, clutching the forbidden text. The path ahead would be perilous, but hope flickered in his chest. If he had the courage to face the darkness within himself, he might yet find a way to save his friends, and perhaps even Lorale, from Malachar's grasp. With the black scaled tome clutched under his robe, Raiskin hurried to the alcove where Miranel and Tavern awaited him. By candlelight, he explained what Professor Nevron had told him about the rite of severance, its dangers, and the need to face not just Malachar, but the darkness within himself. He laid out the ritual, his voice trembling as he recounted the professor's warning. It could only be attempted once, and only with the support of those he trusted most. Miranel's face paled as she read the ritual's requirements. "This is more than banishment. It's a battle for your soul." Tavern's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "We've come this far together. We'll face the risk, whatever it takes." They made a pacting to attempt the rite together, but only after studying every detail, gathering what strength they could, and preparing for the worst. Raiskin's heart ached with fear and gratitude. He knew now that the only way through the shadows was with his friends at his side. As the night deepened, the three began their preparations, each one silently steeling themselves for the night when the darkness would be called forth, and, at last confronted. The days that followed were a blur of stealth and risk. Raiskin and his friends slipped through the Academy's labyrinthine halls, collecting rare and forbidden components from locked cupboards and shadowed storerooms, obsidian chips, a feather from a midnight raven, a vial of moonlit dew, and a splinter of bone from a spirit-haunted reliquary. Each theft brought its own perils. Mirinel's illusions diverted patrolling prefects, while Tavrin's steady nerves picked locks and disarmed magical wards. Twice they were nearly caught, once by a surly potions master who lingered too long in the supply closet, and again by a spectral guardian that sniffed at the edge of Mirinel's glamours. Each narrow escape left Raiskin's heart pounding, the shadow in his mind whispering that power could be seized if only he stopped caring who got in the way. Yet, even as the ritual's ingredients came together, Raiskin noticed the changes in himself deepening. His eyes lingered too long on the darkness between columns, and sometimes he caught himself savoring the thrill of danger, not just dreading it. Mirinel's and Tavrin's loyalty kept him matured, but the voice of Malachar was always there, subtle, hungry, promising that soon the time for secrets would end. With the final component in hand, Raiskin met his friends beneath the old clock tower, the forbidden tomb open between them. The night of the rite was upon them. Whatever happened next, none of them would ever be the same. The clock tower's shadow stretched long over the moonlit courtyard as Raiskin, Mirinel, and Tavrin spread the components for the rite of severance in a careful circle. The forbidden tome lay open at the center, its black-scaled cover shimmering with dangerous promise. Each friend added their tokens to the ritual: Mirinel's charm, Tavrin's wand, Raiskin's locket, and Lorali's silver ring, all reminders of who they were fighting for. Mirinel led the incantation, her voice trembling but steady as she channeled her hope and fear into the spellwork. Tavrin's hand never left Raiskin's shoulder, anchoring him to the present. Raiskin, at the center, focused on the memories and bonds that still made him whole. Even as Malachar's presence pressed against the circle, whispering temptations of power, freedom, and oblivion, the magic surged, light and shadow twisting together. Raiskin felt the spirit's claws scraping at his heart, dredging up every secret shame and moment of weakness. But Mirinel's voice rose in harmony with Tavrin's, and the ritual's light flared, driving Malachar back, if only for a heartbeat. The effort left all three gasping, their minds raw, but still their own. They collapsed together, trembling with exhaustion and relief. Raiskin knew the battle wasn't over. The darkness would return, stronger and more cunning. But for the first time, he believed they might have a chance. Together, they had forced the shadow to retreat. Now, they had to find the strength to face it again, before it found a way to break them apart. After the rite, Raiskin returned to his room, hands shaking as he retrieved his secret journal from its hiding place. By the flickering light of a single candle, he recorded every detail he could recall: the surge of power and terror as Malachar pressed against the circle, Mirinel's unwavering focus, Tavrin's steady grip, the way the ritual left his own mind scraped raw, as if something inside him had been torn open and hastily mended. He wrote about the visions, shadows peeling memories from his mind, the sensation of being watched not just by Malachar, but by something deeper, something inside himself. He marked the moments when his resolve almost cracked, when he longed to give in and let the darkness take away his fear, his love, even his hope. For every triumph he described, he also confessed the small surrenders, a flare of anger, the temptation to push his friends away, the cold delight in forbidden magic. This record, more than any spell, was now his lifeline. Raiskin vowed to update it after every ritual, every confrontation, every slip. If he changed too much, if he lost sight of the person he had been, this journal would be the last map back to himself. And if he failed, if Malachar won, he hoped someone would find it and understand. As dawn crept over the city, Raiskin closed the battered notebook and hid it once more. The battle was far from over, but he was armed with memory, honesty, and the knowledge that he wasn't facing the darkness alone. Not yet. The weight of the ritual's aftermath pressed on Raiskin, and with the term nearing its end, he felt a sudden, desperate need to reclaim something of himself away from the Academy's shadows. He requested leave, and, with the blessing of an unusually understanding Professor Nevrin, returned to his family's manor in Waterdeep for a brief holiday. The old house was just as he remembered, warm with candlelight, alive with the scent of sea air and polished wood. But Raiskin felt changed, a stranger in his childhood rooms. His mother greeted him with tears and laughter, fussing over his pale face and thin frame. Lord Durander was more reserved, but watched Raiskin with an intensity that bordered on worry. Over dinners by the fire and walks through the garden, his parents tried to coax him back to the person he had been, telling stories of his childhood and asking about his studies, his friends, and, delicately, if he was well. Raiskin answered as best he could, leaving out the darkness and the dangers, but the questions made him think. Did he want to return to Blackstaff? Was he still the boy who'd first crossed its gates, or someone else entirely? He sought solace in the Manor's library, but even there, the shadows seemed to follow, curling at the edges of his thoughts. On his final night at home, Raiskin stood his window, looking out over Waterdeep's twinkling lights. He realized the choice ahead was more than whether to finish his studies. It was whether he could ever escape Malachar's influence, or if the fight was now part of who he would always be. Raiskin's restlessness soon overwhelmed the comfort of home. On impulse, he left a note for his parents and set out at dawn. Following the coastal road south of Waterdeep, he needed space, new faces, and a test of himself far from the Academy's shadow. The spring air was crisp. The city fell away behind him, replaced by rolling green hills, windswept cliffs, and the endless charn of the sea. He stopped in a small fishing village, where the locals eyed his noble cloak and spellbook with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. When a harried farmer begged for help with a blighted field, Raiskin could not refuse. He spent the day unraveling a minor curse, drawing on skills honed at Blackstaff. Yet something in the way the shadows clung to the crops made his skin crawl. It was as if Malachar's hunger could reach even here, far from Waterdeep's towers. That evening, Raiskin sat on a dock, watching the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson. He realized this wandering was not an escape, but a reckoning. The darkness he carried would travel with him, no matter how far he ran. Yet the gratitude of the villagers and their simple hospitality offered a balm he'd almost forgotten. He was more than the academy, more than Malachar's whisper, if he chose to be. As the first stars appeared, Raiskin considered his next move. The world was wide, the future uncertain, but for the first time in months, hope and fear felt like choices rather than fate. He could return to Blackstaff, if he dared, or he could carve a new path, one step at a time, until he found the man he wished to become. Raiskin's wanderings took him south along the trade way, through bustling markets and lonely stretches of road, until he reached the fortified river town of Daggerford. The walls loomed above the muddy streets, and the scent of adventure mingled with the promise of danger. He took work where he could, enchanting tools for a tanner, dispelling a curse in the Lady Luck tavern, even lending his spells to a merchant's caravan braving the wilds. But everywhere he went, the shadow followed. Sometimes he caught his reflection in a darkened window, eyes too sharp, smile too thin, and wondered how much of himself remained. Malachar whispered in the hush between towns, tempting him to use his gifts for more than kindness or coin. Each act of magic, each brush with fear, seemed to feed the hunger inside him. Yet Daggerford offered more than shadows. Raiskin found moments of peace listening to minstrels by the fire, trading stories with fellow travelers, and watching the moon rise over the Delimbire. He began to see that the world was more than struggling, it was also laughter, hope, and the simple choice to help a stranger in need. When rumors reached him of goblin raids along the river, Raiskin felt a flicker of purpose. If he could do good, if he could use his power to defend rather than destroy, perhaps the darkness could be held at bay, if not defeated. With a new resolve, he prepared for the road ahead, aware that every step was shaping the man he would become. Raiskin approached the notice board outside Daggerford's barracks, where a rough-edged group of adventurers were assembling at dawn. He introduced himself, careful to hide the darker parts of his story, and offered his skills. The leader, a grizzled dwarf named Broger, eyed him up and down before nodding. "If you can keep your head when the arrows start flying, you're welcome." The company set out along the riverbank, tracking goblin raids to a ruined watchtower. Raiskin worked spells with a precision honed by heartbreak and necessity, shielding his allies and turning back shadowy threats lurking near the water's edge. Yet as the fighting grew fierce, he felt Malachar's voice urging him to unleash more, magic that would end the battle in a flash of darkness, but at what cost? Raiskin resisted, channeling his power into protection, not destruction. His companions took note, Broger's gruff approval, a halfling's clap on the back, the quick trust of strangers. For the first time in months, Raiskin fought not just for survival, but for something like belonging. Still, after the battle, as the goblin threat was repelled and the townsfolk cheered, the hunger remained, a reminder that his journey was far from over. With new scars and new friends, Raiskin looked to the horizon. The road called, and with every step, Malicher's voice grew clearer, its promises sharper. Raiskin knew the real battle was not on the field, but within. Raiskin left Daggerford behind, joining Brogar's company as they answered new calls for aid along the trade way. The band grew tighter with each shared danger. Battling bandits in the night, rescuing villagers from a collapsing bridge, and tracking goblin stragglers into the dense woods. Raiskin found that, when surrounded by others, Malicher's voice was quieter, though never gone. Around campfires, Brogar told tales of lost comrades and the cost of power, his gruff wisdom a steadying force. The halfling, Sarah, always had a jest or a kind word, and even the standoffish elven scout, Nithil, warmed to Raiskin's honesty and skill. With every battle, Raiskin's reputation as a protector grew, but so did the temptation to use darker spells, especially when lives hung in the balance. One moonless night, the company faced a cunning goblin shaman wielding shadow magic, not unlike Raiskin's own. The battle was fiercey. Raiskin's allies trusted him to hold the line, but as the shaman unleashed a wave of darkness, Malicher urged Raiskin to answer in kind. Raiskin's hands trembled with power, his own shadow writhing at his feet, but he forced himself to cast a shield of light instead, breaking the spell and saving his companions. Afterward, Brogar clapped Raiskin on the back. "You've got a strong will, lad. Don't let it fray. The road's long, and the shadow's always hungry." Raiskin nodded, exhaustion and pride warring in his chest. He realized thing every day was a choice between surrender and hope, and he was not done fighting for the man he wished to be. Late that night, Raiskin sat by the campfire with a scrap of parchment and his travel journal. He wrote to Myronel and Tavern, describing the goblin shaman's shadow magic, the temptation to unleash his own darkness, and the struggle to hold fast to the light. He confessed his fears. Was he becoming what he fought? Was it possible to use shadow for good, or must he always resist? He told them of Brogar's guidance, Sarah's laughter, and Nithal's wary respect. He asked for advice, for hope, for any wisdom they could offer from the Academy's libraries or their own hearts. As he sealed the letter with a flicker of cantrip, he felt a pang of longing for their friendship and for the bonds that had saved him so many times before. Before dawn, Raiskin handed the letter to a caravan messenger bound for Waterdeep, his heart heavy, but lighter for the sharing. He resolved to wait for their reply before attempting any new rituals, to be a stranger, and to trust the strength of the connections that had carried him through every battle so far. As the company broke camp, Raiskin cast one last look at the rising sun. Whatever answers came, he would walk the road ahead with open eyes, and the hope that even in the darkest places, he was never truly alone. As Raiskin journeyed further with Brogar's company, the road unfolded into a string of hard-won victories and narrow escapes. They faced not only goblin bands, but warg packs and the remnants of a bandit lord's retinue, always pressing deeper into the wilds. Sira's laughter lightened the darkest nights, and Brogar's gruff commands became a welcome constant. Nithil too slowly opened up, a sharing elven songs and offering quiet advice about the balance between light and shadow. Raiskin learned the value of trust, how to fight back to back, to rely on a comrade's shield, to celebrate each dawn as a small miracle. Yet every time he used his magic in a desperate moment, Malachur's voice was there. You could end this with a word. Why do you hold back? He clung to the lessons of restraint, but the hunger for power had become a part of him, a shadow that could not be outrun. One evening, as the group rested by a forest stream, Sarah asked him about his time at Blackstaff. Raiskin hesitated, then told the truth. About the academy, the friendships that had saved him, and the darkness he fought each day. Broger listened in silence, then nodded. All of us carry shadows, lad. The trick is to know which ones are yours, and which ones belong to someone, or something else. With new resolve, Raiskin prepared for the next leg of the journey. The world was vast, its dangers many, but he was no longer alone in facing them. Whether Malachur's voice grew or faded, the fight for his soul would be fought in the company of those who called him friend. After the night's battle, Raiskin found Nethel at the edge of the camp, the elf sharpening arrows by moonlight. With a hesitant honesty, Raiskin asked for help resisting the lure of shadow magic. Nithel studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Shadow is a tool, but it is also a mirror. You must know the shape of your own darkness before you try to wield it. Over the following weeks, Nithel taught Raiskin elven meditations and grounding rituals, ways to calm his mind and separate his desires from Malachar's whispers. They practiced by the river at dawn, focusing on the ebb and flow of magic, learning to sense the difference between hunger and genuine need. Nithel's guidance was strict but gentle. When you feel the urge for more power, do not fear it. Examine it. Ask what it wants and why. Then choose with open eyes. Raiskin struggled, but small victories came, moments where he deflected Malachur's urgings, spells cast with clarity rather than desperation. He began to see that resisting the darkness was not about denial or force, but about understanding, patience, and the courage to let others help. The road ahead was still long, and Malachar's voice was never truly silent. But as Raiskin marched beside his companions, he felt lighter, no longer just a vessel for shadows, but a man learning to claim his own will, one dawn at a time. One morning by the misty riverbank, Raiskin approached Nithel with a question that had haunted him since Blackstaff. Where did shadow magic truly come from? And what did he know of spirits like Malachar? Nethel's eyes grew distant as he answered. Shadow magic is older than the weave itself. The elves call it the echo, the memory of the world's first darkness. It is power borrowed from the places between things, between light and night, life and death. It is seductive because it feels like freedom, but it always demands a price. He spoke of ancient legends, sorcerers who built empires on shadow and lost themselves, spirits like Malachar, once guardians, now hungry echoes of forgotten fears. And the greatest danger is not the spirit's hunger, Nithel warned, but the part of you that answers it. The stories say only those who face their own shadow, without flinching or pride, can ever hope to master or banish such a presence. Raiskin listened, heart heavy but enlightened. The path ahead would not about destroying Malachar, but understanding what within himself gave the spirit strength. The journey was not just on the road, but through the darkness inside. And for the first time, he felt ready to walk it, even if the way was long and lonely. Raiskin waited until the others were asleep, then found Nithil in the hush of the moonlit woods. "You said only those who face their own shadow can resist it. How do I begin?" he asked, voice raw with longing and unease. Nithil led him deeper into the forest, where the trees grew ancient and the air was thick with memory. "You must seek solitude, but not escape," the elf said softly. "In the heart of shadow, meditate with no wards, no distractions, just your true self and the darkness you carry. Let Malachar speak, but do not answer. Observe, describe every fear, every hunger, every shame. Only when you see your shadow clearly can you choose what to accept and what to cast away." Raiskin shivered but nodded. For the next several nights, he sat alone under the stars, letting Malachar's voice fill his mind. He wrote down every whisper in his secret journal, refusing to flinch from the parts of himself that yearned for power or retreated into fear. It was agonizing, but slowly he began to recognize which thoughts were his, and which belonged to the spirit. The process left him shaken, but as the dawn broke after a long vigil, Raiskin felt a flicker of freedom he'd never known. He was still hunted by darkness, but now he could see it for what it was. And for the first time, he truly believed the fight for his soul was one he could win. Night after night, Raiskin returned to the woods for his meditations, pushing deeper into the memories and fears that Malachar stirred within him. He relived the betrayal of Loralia's father, the helplessness of losing control, and the hunger for power that had nearly consumed him in battle. He forced himself to write down every vision, every shame, every secret wish for escape or dominance that flickered through his mind. The process was both agony and revelation. Sometimes, Malachar's voice swelled into a storm, promising him greatness if only he would surrender, and sometimes it grew sly, whispering that his restraint was weakness. But as Raiskin watched these shadows come and go, he began to see them as patterns, old wounds, fears of abandonment, pride and longing for approval, not just Malachar's poison, but pieces of his own fractured heart. One dawn, as the mist curled over the river, Raiskin realized something had shifted. The voice was still there, still hungry, but it no longer felt all-powerful. It was not the darkness itself, but his shadow, a presence to be understood and integrated, rather than simply banished or obeyed. He felt both exhausted and light, as if a burden had eased for the first time in years. He returned to camp, silent but changed. The path ahead was still uncertain, but as he looked at his friends around the fire, he knew he was no longer just resisting Malachar. He was learning to know himself, and that was the first step toward true freedom. That night, Raiskin sat by the campfire, journal in hand, composing a letter to Lorali. He wrote of his meditations, how he'd faced the worst parts of himself, the envy, the anger, the aching loneliness Malachar fed on. He described the agony of letting Malachar's whispers fill his mind, and the relief of finally discerning which thoughts were his own. "Ah, I am learning," he confessed. that the shadow is not only an enemy, but a wound to be understood. Each day, I claim a little more of myself back. He asked her about her own struggles, about the darkness she had faced in her family and the academy. "Do you ever feel the world inside you is not your own?" he wrote. "How do you keep hope when the past tries to write your future?" As he sealed the letter and gave it to a merchant bound for Waterdeep, Raiskin felt lighter, if only for a moment. The act of reaching out across the miles was another step away from isolation, another thread woven into the tapestry of his life. He wondered if Lorali would understand, or if her own journey had led her further from the boy she once knew. He returned to the fire, the voices of his companions murmuring around him, and for the first time in months, the night felt less cold. Whatever answers Lorali sent, he knew he was not walking the shadowed path alone. Raiskin joined Broger and Sarah at dawn, the three striking out ahead of the main company to scout a rumored goblin camp in the dense southern woods. Broger's gruff presence was reassuring, while Sarah's quick wit and cheerful songs kept the tension at bay. Raiskin focused on his breathing, using the elven meditations Nithal had taught him, anchoring himself in the present moment and the trust of his companions. They moved quietly through the undergrowth, Sierra pointing out hidden tracks and Brogar using hand signals to coordinate their approach. When they finally reached the camp, a ring of crude tents around a smoky fire, Raiskin felt Malachar's presence surge, eager for violence. But instead of letting the shadow take over, Raiskin paused, observed the hunger, and let it pass through him without action. He signaled restraint, and together they devised a clever distraction, scattering the goblins and freeing a group of frightened captives without unnecessary bloodshed. Afterward, as they caught their breath, Broger grinned. "You've got a good head for this, boy. Never let the darkness choose for you." Sarah handed Raiskin a wildflower and winked. "Not bad for a city wizard. You're learning." Raiskin smiled for the first time in days. He'd faced not just the enemy in the woods, but the one inside himself, and for now, he'd won. The journey was not over, but he was no longer afraid to walk it step by step in the company of friends and under his own will. At the next council of the adventuring company, Raiskin surprised Broger by quietly volunteering to lead the next scouting mission. The dwarf's eyes crinkled with approval as Sierra whooped with excitement. "You've earned it, lad," Broger said, handing Raiskin a battered map and a list of objectives. "Trust your instincts, and your team." The mission was harder than the last, a goblin warren hidden in a maze of ravines, with traps set not just for the body but for the mind. Raiskin led with caution and creativity, guiding the group around the worst dangers and using his magic judiciously. When Malachar's temptations surged, urging him to strike down the goblin chief with a spell of pure shadow, Raiskin paused, acknowledged the hunger, and chose another path, outsmarting the enemy with illusion and clever strategy. Sierra was the first to cheer when they emerged victorious, and Brogar clasped Raiskin's shoulder with pride. You're not running from your darkness, the dwarf said, but neither are you letting it lead. That's the mark of a true leader. As the group celebrated by the fire, Raiskin felt a quiet strength blossom inside him. The voice of Malachar was still there, but for now, it was only one voice among many, no longer the master of his fate. The journey was not over, but for the first time, Raiskin believed he could choose his own path, no matter how shadowed the way. With the company's trust earned, Raiskin and Broger pored over maps and rumors, planning a bold strike against a larger threatening. A goblin warband amassing in the hills, rumored to have allied with a shadowy sorcerer. Raiskin felt the old fear and hunger stirring inside. But this time he met it with a clear mind and steady breath. He devised a plan that used magic for deception and defense, weaving his companions' strengths into a strategy that would outwit rather than overpower. The mission was dangerous: traps, ambushes, and a final confrontation with the Warband's leader, whose eyes gleamed with the same shadow Raiskin fought each night. In the heat of battle, Malachar's voice shrieked for dominance, but Raiskin held fast, channeling the trust of his friends instead of the spirit's hunger. The company emerged battered but victorious, the Warband broken, and the shadow sorcerer fleeing into the wilds. Afterward, Broger toasted Raiskin before the fire, Sira sang a raucous ballad of their deeds, and Nightle offered a quiet nod of respect. Raiskin felt changed, not because Malachar was gone, but because he had chosen again and again to be more than the darkness inside him. The fight was not over, but for the first time he saw the possibility of victory not just against Malachar, but for his own soul. As the company prepared to move on, Raiskin realized he was ready to return to Blackstaff, or perhaps to seek out those answers he'd left unfinished. For now, he had found a measure of peace on the road, and the resolve to keep choosing the man he wished to become. Before the company broke camp, Raiskin found Nithal watching the sunrise from a mossy ridge. "I don't want to just leave this behind," Raiskin said quietly. "What if the darkness returns stronger, or I falter next time? Is there more I can learn?" Nithal regarded him with solemn approval. "You have learned much already, more than many would dare. But remember, true mastery is not the absence of fear or temptation, but the wisdom to recognize them as part of yourself. Each time you choose compassion or strategy over hunger, you reaffirm who you are. The shadow is never truly gone, but neither is the light." He handed Raiskin a small, intricately carved stone. "This is a focus stone, passed through my clan. Use it in your meditations when the darkness grows. Let it remind you of the choices you've made and the friends who walk with you. And when you return to Blackstaff, teach others what you've discovered." Raiskin accepted the stone with gratitude, feeling its subtle warmth, a tangible symbol of both elven wisdom and his own journey. As he prepared to part ways with the company, he knew the road ahead would still be shadowed, but it would also be his own. On his last morning with the company, Raiskin walked alone into the ancient woods, Nithal's focused stone warm in his palm. He settled into meditation, breathing in the scent of moss and loam, letting the silence draw out every shadow in his mind. Malachar's voice rose, sharper than ever, dredging up every regret and secret yearning. Power, vengeance, the ache of lost love. This time, Raiskin did not flinch. He acknowledged each thought, naming it, refusing to let it grow or hide. As the hours passed, his mind moved through darkness and back to lighting memories of laughter by the fire, the comfort of Sarah's songs, Brogger's steady hand, the promise in Lorelei's silver ring. The focused stone pulsed gently, reminding him that the shadow was only one part of him. Not his master, but his teacher. In that stillness, Raiskin glimpsed a Vigion himself standing at a crossroads, the road behind filled with ghosts, the way ahead ringed with both light and shadow, his friends' faces shining at his side. When he returned to camp, the others were ready to move on. Raiskin felt at peace, the world sharper and more real. He had not banished Malachar, but he had made a truce with his own soul, and found the courage to return to Blackstaff, to finish what he had started, and to help others face their own shadows. He hugged Brogger, Sarah, and Nithal in turn, promising to write and to return if needed. As the sun rose over the road, Raiskin set out for Waterdeep, the focused stone in his pocket, and a new sense of self guiding every step. The road to Waterdeep was long, but Raiskin walked it with purpose. His mind was clearer than it had been in years, the focused stone warm in his pocket, and the memory of his companions' trust steadying his steps. He rehearsed what he would say to his professors, to Moranil and Tavrin, to Lorelei, how he would share what he had learned about the shadow within, and the choices that still lay before him. The city's spires on the horizon, shrouded in morning mist. Crossing the city gates, Raiskin felt both a stranger and a son returned. The familiar bustle of Waterdeep was both comforting and daunting, and as he made his way to Blackstaff Academy's tall, rune-carved doors, he paused to breathe, centering himself with Nithal's stone. He had come home not to escape the darkness, but to teach others how to face it. Inside the academy, whispers followed him, rumors of his absence, of strange magic on the roads, of triumphs and troubles left behind. Yet, as Raiskin entered the great hall, he walked with his head high, the shadow still whispering, but his own will louder. He was ready to seek his friends, his professors, and, at last, to confront the unfinished business that awaited in the heart of Blackstaff. As the bells tolled the hour, Raiskin stepped into the dawn-lit corridors. A new chapter beginning. A chapter that would test everything he had learned on the wandering road. Raiskin's first stop in Blackstaff was the post room, heart pounding as he asked for any letters in his name. The clerk handed him a pale blue envelope, sealed in silver wax. Recognizing Lorelei's script, Raiskin's hands shook as he opened it in the quiet of a nearby alcove. Her letter was a balm and a blade. She wrote of her own meditations, her struggles with the legacy of her family, and the ache of separation. "I carry my shadow too," she wrote, "but I am learning, as you are, to let it teach me rather than rule me. I still wear your ring, and every day I choose hope, even when hope feels like a lie." She ended her letter with a promise. "I will find you again, Raiskin. When the time is right, the paths of shadow and light will cross once more." Until then, let the memory of our vow shield you, as it shields me." Raiskin pressed the letter to his heart, relief and longing mingling in his chest. He looked up to see a familiar, silver-haired figure at the far end of the corridor, Lorelei, watching him with a small, secret smile before slipping away into the maze of the academy. The promise of reunion was real, and for now that was enough. Raiskin's heart hammered as he chased after Lorelei, dodging startled students and ignoring the curious glances that followed him down the academy's twisting halls. He caught a glimpse of her silver hair disappearing around a corner, her pale blue robe blending with the morning light. "Lorelei," he called, voice low but urgent. She paused in a sunlit alcove, half hidden by a tapestry depicting the founding of Blackstaff. When he reached her, their eyes met, no words needed. For a moment, the world shrank to just the two of Thing, all the pain and longing, all the hope and fear. Lorelei smiled, and Raiskin stepped forward, hands trembling as he pressed her letter back into her palm. "I got your words," he whispered, "and I'm still here, shadows and all." She squeezed his hand in return, her touch fierce and gentle at once. "We'll have to be careful," she murmured. "My father is watching. The headmaster too. But we're stronger now, Raiskin, I believe it. I see it in you." A bell rang and footsteps echoed nearer. With a final, desperate squeeze, Lorelei slipped away, vanishing into the maze of the academy. Raiskin lingered a moment longer, hope and courage burning in his chest. No matter how the shadows gathered, he knew he was not alone, and that soon their paths would truly cross again, no matter the cost. The corridors twisted, but Raiskin kept pace, determined not to lose Lorelei again. He found her in a quiet garden courtyard, sunlight dappling the flagstones. The air scented with new blossoms. She waited, her posture tense, but her eyes alight with relief and longing when Raiskin appeared. "You're reckless," she chided softly, but her smile belied the rebuke. "And brave." For a few precious moments, they spoke in hushed voices, of their journeys, their hard-won strengths, and the dangers still lurking at the academy. Lorelei pressed a folded slip of parchment into his hand, her fingers lingering. "Read this if you must disappear again," she whispered. "I'll keep fighting, Raiskin, for us, no matter what they do." Their embrace was brief but fierce, a promise made real for a heartbeat before the sound of approaching footsteps scattered them. Lorelei vanished among the archways, and Raiskin slipped back into the flow of students, heart pounding with hope and fear. He felt the shadows stir, but his resolve burned brighter. He was not alone, and he would not hide from love or darkness any longer. Back in his chamber, he opened Lorelei's note. It was a coded message, a plan for one more secret meeting. This time, not just for words, but to face what haunted Blackstaff together. Raiskin found Moranal and tavern in a quiet corner of the library, where lamplight painted pools of gold on the marble floor. He showed them Loralia's coded note, explaining her plan for a secret meeting. Mirinal's eyes sparkled with excitement and worry. "We'll help," she whispered, already studying the slip for hidden runes and invisible ink. "But we'll need to be smart. The headmaster has eyes everywhere." Tavern grinned, his confidence a welcome anchor. "Let's decipher it together. If they're watching, we'll have to cover your tracks. Miranal, can you craft a subtle illusion to throw off any magical scrying? I'll keep an ear out for rumors of prefect patrols. Raiskin, your job is to memorize every detail of the plan. No written traces." As they worked, Raiskin felt the familiar warmth of camaraderie and purpose. The three friends pieced together Loralie's instruction a meeting at midnight in the disused observatory, where shadows might hide them from both prying eyes and Malachur's whisper. With the code cracked, they rehearsed every step, every alibi, every precaution. For the first time since his return, Raiskin felt the power of friendship and hope surging through him, stronger than any shadow. They parted with a shared promising, whatever haunted Blackstaff or threatened their hearts, they would face it together, no matter who tried to keep them apart.